In August of 2006, and don't worry, we're not going to do this here. It happened to me in 2006. I told you about Vivian and Burney. I told you that Burney was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease when he was about 75. He had been a CPA, a very successful CPA, an intelligent, capable fellow. And, as Alzheimer's will do, it started taking away a lot of his ability to tap that information. And I think remind you that dementia is not a loss of intelligence. Your loved ones will sometimes say they feel stupid because they can't remember something or because they can't do something as well as they used to. It has nothing to do with intelligence. The information, the real frustration of this illness for professionals is most of that information is there. It's just dementia cuts off the ability to get to it. It's sort of like the file room with all the information is still there, but the key only works part of the time to get into the files. But as a result of the illness, it of course affected Burney's ability to do the things that he would traditionally do. He became increasingly forgetful. He had what we call expressive aphasia. What that means is, and not everyone gets this, but a lot of people with dementia do, the ability to take the thought that's in your head and make it come out your mouth in a coherent way. So he would be trying very hard to tell you something, but he couldn't get the words in a way that anyone outside of him would understand. And he would see by your reaction that you clearly weren't getting. He could still hear and process the information going in, but he couldn't bring it out. As the disease progressed, it took some of that ability too. But initially it was very frustrating for him. So Vivian, being a good caregiver, simply started speaking for him. She filled in the blanks. When Burney would make a statement, which might come out as the boat went down the trail on the other side of the fence, I don't know what I think, how are you? Vivian would say, oh, Burney is telling you about the trip we just got back from. I didn't hear that. Vivian started making sure that Burney was still there. It was Vivian's projection based on the information she had about Burney. But she was not going to accept that this illness was changing him. That the man she knew, the man she had loved, was going away. So she continued to do that. The idea of filling out new legal forms, changing power of attorney, Burney was no longer able to communicate what decisions should be made about Vivian if something happened to Vivian. He was no longer, even though he had wonderful knowledge of financial matters, he was no longer able to fill in reasonable or coherent financial information. But he was still on all the checkbooks. She still had discussions, long discussions with him about how they should do things. Even though Burney was not able to understand what she was talking about and was not able to provide any reasonable or even coherent information back. But she wasn't going to give up. And the reason that I was talking about Vivian and Burney was, of course, to help caregivers appreciate the need to accept the illness and to accept the impact that it has. And most importantly, and obviously most troubling, is to accept the fact that you are losing the loved one you know, that they are no longer there. And we're not trained for that. That's not our reality. People either are living or they're not living. They're not gone and still standing in front of us. And yet, that is the impact of this illness. We all come to that acceptance at some point in our lives. For Vivian, I told you about, it came in exhaustion. She simply ran out of juice. She could not do what she had been doing. She couldn't fill in the blanks anymore. She could hardly get out of bed herself. Burney, however, was still a very physically healthy guy and loved to take long walks. Unfortunately, he had no idea where he was going or how to get back. So they lived in a neighborhood where neighbors, she got to meet a lot of neighbors this way. I guess that helped the social interaction because people had to keep bringing Burney home. finally she was able to see that she could not continue in the way. And I might point out that they had long-term care insurance. They had the ability to pay for help. Well, better yet, have the insurance company pay for help. But she would not initially accept any of it. Eventually, we were able to get Vivian to understand the things she needed to do. But it only came at the point that she was in a deep depression and literally physically exhausted. And I also shared with you at that time that Burney was my father-in-law. And my point in telling you all of that at that time, and again today, is that it doesn't matter who you hear it from. I was the guy trying to get Vivian to understand what she needed to do. I was giving more speeches to her than I give to the support network. But she wasn't going to hear it. She wasn't going to accept it. She could not let go